All right, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Leadership and Live podcast with your host, Ricardo D. Rice, and my co-host,
Simone Shuri.
All right, so we're continuing. I feel like the last couple of guests have been like real freedom fighters and champions for the people, and we're continuing that today with our next guest. Yeah, that's like the running theme for these next couple of episodes. Actually, it is because Marcus is next week, Kim is the week after that. Oh, we bringing it to you. We really bringing it to you. But this is the offset because, I just finished the Black Men series with the TV show, which Simone was a part of as well. So we covered everything from justice and equity to mentality, and it was a whole 5-part series. But I'm not getting to that. You can go to ricecommunity.com, Rice with a W, and watch all those episodes, or IOM Network and watch all those episodes. But I'm going to let today's guest introduce himself, and we can go from there.
Ricardo, Simone, what's up?
What's up?
Thanks for having me. My name is David Windecher. I'm a criminal defense attorney. I'm an author, and I'm also an activist in the restorative justice space. I have a nonprofit organization that I founded in 2015 called RED, which stands for Rehabilitation Enables Dreams. RED used to be my nickname for obvious reasons when I was gangbanging.
See, I didn't know that, so I'm glad you said I didn't know that. I was like, where did he get? Wow. Well, it did make sense when you see the words, but I didn't know. Okay.
And there's a lot of reasons why I named it RED. And I can tell you guys all about that now. But it's just exciting to be with y'all, and I'm looking forward to this interview.
Oh, we're happy to have you here. So, Simone, you have stuff. You got this look on your face like you have stuff that you want to get into.
I do, because I really do want to get into your story. We're going to talk a lot about it. If you haven't picked up your book, I want you to tell people what that is, because it's on Amazon. It's really easy to get.
Thanks, Simone. It's The American Dream, His Story in the Making by myself, David Lee Windecher. It's an autobiography that goes over what it takes to become a lawyer in America, being the son of immigrants and an impoverished individual with 13 criminal arrests.
Yes, not one, not two. But I can't wait. But let's talk about top stories first, because there's been a lot of news. We didn't get to speak with you as the Chauvin trial was going on, but I remember when we did come in and talk about it a little bit, we had to just kind of go over some of the highlights. Like, I know that a lot of people couldn't watch the entire thing. I'm sure a lot of people watched the outcome. As of this morning, the other officers that, remember, did not go first were indicted. So a federal grand jury has indicted those officers. I'd like to kind of talk a little bit more about policing and what we think may be next. Like, there's been lots of different legislative bills that have popped up as a result of not just the George Floyd murder that we all witnessed, but also Breonna Taylor. No-knock warrants has been one of those issues. Qualified immunity has been another issue. We've talked also a lot about accountability and body cameras and what that kind of means and how helpful they are. And certainly I think viral videos have changed the face of criminal justice for sure in a lot of different ways. Also inside facilities. I'd love to know kind of your take on that as well, and how you feel. Do you think we've turned a corner here? Do you think this verdict has turned a corner?
No.
Okay.
And here's why. Because the reality is it's accountability, right? And do we need to have a trial to make that man accountable? No, but obviously criminal procedure, you got to go through that. And then while the most anticipated police brutality murder trial in the history of the United States is ongoing, I think that the highlight of it is what happened during the trial, where another individual is murdered by police 10 miles away from the courthouse, which kind of tells you that these things are still happening while this trial is ongoing, that it highlights that we have a lot of work left to do.
Sure.
Is it progress? Yes, but I think that having one result could be considered a one-off unless we start seeing accountability on a regular basis.
Do you think this is something laws can fix, though? Like, do you think that there is a policy or a series of policies going to make a difference? Do you believe that the law is powerful enough to change?
Yes, that I would believe. I think that the conversation isn't going anywhere. I think isn't leaving us. We have meaningful dialogue across different channels now. And I believe that whether it's at the state level or the federal level, there are going to be some changes with regards to police culture reform. And I am not one of those defund the police folks. I don't believe in that. I believe repurpose the police is important. And I think that that's going to start happening now, especially because of the attention that these kind of situations have been getting lately.
For sure.
I mean, I agree with him. I think that the term defund the police is too strong. Like, most people immediately go, and like I said, I honestly fought Trump with that commercial, because I still see that commercial in my head, the commercial where the phone rings, nobody's answering it. They call 911, it's just like nobody answers it. Right. You're like, this is what defund the police will look like. And when you actually have the conversation and people really, those that are well endowed with that information, explain it, you're just like, yeah, That's what we should do. So I think that's the missing part. These conversations are not happening to really unravel what these terms mean, because they really can make a world of difference.
I agree with that. I mean, the reality is that this has been ongoing for a very long time. So this conversation is long overdue. And because of what has happened in 2020 and the attention it's gotten, while everybody's been able to be focused on it because everybody's been sheltering in place because of the pandemic, I think it created a situation where people who weren't necessarily paying attention to this are now focused on this. And that's why you see all these DE&I councils, and I know you guys want me to describe acronyms whenever I bring them up.
Yeah.
So diversity, equity, and inclusion are now department arms that are happening in Fortune 100, 500 companies, and they're all reaching out about justice-involved employment. How do they get involved in social justice issues? So it's not going to go away anytime soon. I hope that it'll create momentum to get us to fix it, because defunding the police is not correct. Repurposing the police is exactly what we need to do. Getting them. Do you know what COP stands for? Another acronym?
That's an acronym?
That is an acronym. It stands for Community-Oriented Policing. We need
Seriously?
Absolutely. We need to get back to that, because it doesn't stand for that right now.
I did not know that's what that meant. I thought that was just a word. I did not know it was an acronym.
Yeah, and one of the cases that actually Christopher Bruce brought up, the ACLU's political director in Georgia, that I thought was a really good example of that, was the Rayshard Brooks case.
Oh.
The idea that, if you see somebody on the side of the road and, or they pulled off and they're kind of slumped over, public safety would mean, okay, good, this person's off the road. Let's make sure their vehicle's not operable. Let's make sure they're not intoxicated. Like, public safety means let's keep everybody safe, not necessarily like let's throw you in the in the back of a paddy wagon. And even if we do, let's not escalate a situation to the point where it becomes violent. But there's definitely, I think, a difference between public safety or community safety and law enforcement. Those are just two very, very different things.
And Simone, you break a great point up with the Rayshard Brooks situation. Facts aside, okay, let's not talk about the taser, the discharge, none of that. If you're the police officer and you are investigating someone for a misdemeanor offense, and this is happening in a family restaurant parking lot, is discharging your firearm fulfilling the COP acronym of community-oriented policing? I don't think so, because he's very lucky that another round didn't accidentally hit an innocent bystander, because we'd be having a completely different conversation. He probably wouldn't have his job back, which I'm shocked about that in the first place. But yeah,
that I was flabbergasted when I saw that headline and it started trending. I was like, wait, what? How does that even? Who's on the oversight committee for these kinds of things? How does this slip by? I can't get there.
Yeah.
Well, so this brings it back to, you asked me, hey, is this going to change things? No, because a situation like that, he got his job back before the criminal process has even fully played out. And so the reality is the Chauvin situation a one-off? Are we going to go revert back to where we were, or are we going to start building momentum and creating true accountability?
So let me ask you this, because especially because of your story, but also because of where you are now, you are a practicing attorney, so you know the law, upwards and downwards. One of the things that I find so fascinating, but also like this huge hurdle, is like there's a huge disconnect between what people know and what officers know, even in terms of how they have to interact with police. And like from state to state to state to state, it can vary so wildly. Like in some states you have to present ID, in other states you don't. In some states you have to give your name if it's asked, in other states you don't, without probable cause. It's like there's such deviation. And I was just looking up a statistic about how much Americans move, and 70% of people over the age of 25 are not living in their home state. And the idea that like you're supposed to know laws everywhere you go, the moment you see some of these videos, there's usually like the second the interaction starts, it's almost like your mind can see it playing out. It's like the person is pissed off that they're pulled over. It's only going up from there. Like maybe the cop is, asking them 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 questions and asking them why they have an attitude, and then they get an even bigger attitude. And I just kind of like, I want to know if you always had an understanding, or if you think certain people just have a better understanding of how to interact with the police or not, or maybe if that should be just more common knowledge. I really feel like it's not common knowledge, and there are people who insist that, at least in Georgia, you need to tell me why you pulled me over, which it's helpful, but I don't think legally they need to tell you why they pulled you over. Isn't that right?
Well, they have to tell you why they stopped you. You have a right to be on the road, and you have a right to commute to where you want to go. And if they stop you, they have to explain to you why.
Oh, I didn't know
they
in Georgia
stopped
that was
you.
the case.
Yeah, I mean, you have to show ID. You have to be able to identify yourself. So if you become standoffish and you're like, I'm not showing you ID, that's where the problem becomes. I think the onus is obviously on the police to do a better job of interacting with the citizenry, but citizens should also educate themselves on what's appropriate, what's not appropriate, what's legal, what's illegal. Because I see a lot of these videos, and a lot of these videos, like you said, you see it playing out.
Yeah.
The officer is defensive. The individual is standoffish. And it doesn't ever result in a good situation for the individual. So one of the things that we do in our program is we have a Know Your Rights module where we created a simulation of police-citizen encounters to help our we love it. It's one of our favorite modules because it helps our program participants understand how to assert their constitutional rights without being defensive and combative. And it also teaches them that these are police officers that have families and children that they need to go back to safely. So their safety is a priority, but there's a way to communicate with them in a way that prevents the situation from becoming deadly or something that they don't want it to become.
Right.
There's a ton of, but that goes back to the police, right? So if you want a community-oriented police officer, we need to start training them that way. We need to start training them that they need to explain to people, why did you stop them? If you stop them for speeding, just say, I stopped you for speeding. Don't say, I need your ID. Hey, Mr. So-and-so, Mrs. So-and-so, I stopped you for speeding. Can I see your ID? I just watched a video recently. I don't know if you guys have seen it, but the police officer, after he's not getting the ID from the individual, finally says why he stopped him. And he made up a thing. He said, I stopped you because you're going under the speed limit. You're going 5 miles under the speed limit. And the guy's like, well, isn't the speed limit like the limit?
Yeah.
And the officer's like, yes, but wouldn't it make you suspicious if you see someone driving under the speed limit?
Yeah.
No, it wouldn't, unless they're on the HOV lane.
But that sounds like something that they would say for sure. I had a similar situation when I was driving through Alabama, and it was really dark and it was really late. But he told me, in Alabama we have a slowpoke law. Now it was 2 a.m. and it was raining, so I was a little nervous. Like I had a car full of people. Like I wasn't nervous, but I was driving slower than I would normally drive. I don't think I was driving that slow. I was maybe like 5 or so under, but it was raining and it was 2 a.m. And I was driving through Alabama on one of those like long highways, and a cop came up behind me and told me I was violating us. We have a slowpoke law. But he asked me to get out of my car to do it, and so everybody in my car now was like awake and like looking, and I'm just like, y'all don't stop making sudden movements. Like stop trying to watch what's going on. Everybody just chill, because I'm about to leave this car right now, and I don't need him looking over my shoulder and trying to figure out what everybody is doing in the car. But I
think that's the thing though.
And then he just took me out to say, you're going too slow, and sent me on my way. But
he took you out the car to do that?
Yeah, he had me come out of the car and then step behind the car and talk. And it was like, again, it's like 2 a.m. I'm in like the middle of nowhere. I'm like, I see deer in the distance, and I'm like, I don't know.
Oh, you were at my hometown. Oh, you were at my hometown. Okay, yeah, that was Bronco
but
the deer.
But that's all he took me out. But had I been upset or like combative,
it could have been
really
different.
Felt like an attitude test. That's just what it felt like.
Well, I think Attorney Griggs, and he touched on it last week when he was saying that we have to create a culture that inspires police to do what's right versus the camaraderie thing they do and kind of covering up stuff and looking out for each other. And I agree with that. I think it's a culture thing. Like I'm not a policeman, but that seems to be the culture that we cover each other, which I get. But to what extent? Like, is it to an extent to violate people's civil rights and things of that magnitude, or endanger their lives to this capacity?
Right.
It's interesting when you say culture, because the culture historically has been that whenever an officer commits or allegedly commits a wrong, it goes to Internal Affairs. And then Internal Affairs is some guy that he went to, training academy with, and it's like, well, he's investigating. Well, I'm sure an investigation is going to be conducted, and there's going to be a report, and that report is going to end with no sanctions.
Sure.
Or Daffy Duck at the bottom of it, signed signature.
Yeah, and that should go. That's another thing that they need to fix in the culture, right? When you have an infraction by a police officer, it shouldn't be investigated by someone that is tied to that department in some way. It should be an independent source that comes in and says, okay, I'm going to be objective through and through.
Right. I think that's a really good point. It's almost like we were saying, could I ask the IRS if I could audit myself? Like I'll figure out if I did this wrong or not. But okay, so moving a little bit further along and then tying to what you do a lot. You're in the business. Not the business, the mission of rehabilitation. I say the business because there's so much more to it than people think, and that's a word tossed around a lot. I think that depending on how you feel about criminal justice reform, most people like the idea or believe in the idea of rehabilitation. But there are also a lot of people who believe that our system should punish, that our system should, I hear on a regular basis, it should hold people accountable. And what they mean is, in some cases, they should be banned from society. Life should be hard. You bring up A case or B case or C case, they're like, well, that person committed a crime. but this is what you do on a regular basis. So I know that you are more than aware, and also a living testament that people can change. So how do you tell me about kind of your field and your story, but also what rehabilitation means to you? Can you define that?
That
for
was
people?
like 5 questions in one thing. Okay,
Well,
so let's just
define it first.
We'll let him go ahead and tell his story first, and then we'll
Okay.
kind of go from there. So let's go
Okay,
ahead
so you
and
want
get
me
to
to
your
tell
story.
the story?
Yeah,
All
yeah.
right,
and
so
then
we'll come back to
it'll
that, 'cause
lead.
I do have an idea of how I want to answer that question.
cool.
Well, my story. My parents are Argentinian, and they decided that they wanted to move to America because they believed that pursuing the American dream would be something that they wanted to do for their kids. So my father, they migrate to Los Angeles, California, and this is in 1977. I'm born in 78. I'm the oldest of 4. Well, about 7 years were there. My dad was a blue-collar laborer, painting machinery, right? One point, the company that he worked for didn't want to pay him. And so he filed a civil complaint. He goes before the trial court or the probate court, and they ruled in his favor. They gave him an interpreter. Obviously, it's civil, so they don't appoint counsel. And so he thought he won, and he would be rewarded damages for what he wasn't being paid. A notice comes in that the company that lost appealed the lower ruling, and he had to show back up. Well, didn't have money for an attorney. They didn't have an interpreter, and next thing you know, he loses. And this is a man who I'm watching do the most difficult things to support his family, and for him to walk out like that, as a 6-year-old, 7-year-old. This was my first experience with the American jurisprudence system, and I thought, wow, my dad lost because he couldn't communicate, because he was foreign, not because he was wrong. And so obviously that planted seeds with me that one day I wanted to become an attorney. So we left, we went back to Argentina, and we experienced real poverty there. We were living on a dirt road, on a cinder block home with a plastic sheet over our heads and then curtains for doors. And it was rough, but we had each other. My parents created a loving home. They taught us great principles, and we just had a great time. My dad worked really hard for several years and saved up enough money to bring us back to the States. But this time, instead of going to the gang capital of the world, Los Angeles, we go to Miami, which is the international hub for drug trafficking.
Drug capital.
That's what I've been told.
Yeah. And so it's an interesting environment to grow up in. And at the age of 11, I'm there, and I'm too young to realize that we moved into the hood, right? I don't understand that. But what I did realize was that poverty felt consequential in America at this point in time. In Argentina, everybody wore the same clothes to school. It was a uniform. You're not worried about materialistic stuff. And you get here, and it's like, oh, man, I'm wearing the same clothes every day to school, and everybody's got different, and it just affected me. Well, my brother and I, we shared a bicycle, and we needed that bike to get to and from school, but the handlebar was stripped, so I couldn't tighten the handlebar to tow each other, so it was either he uses it or I use it. I made a decision to steal a set of pegs, and it was dumb, right? I made a poor decision. I didn't understand how to deal with poverty, but I stole a set of pegs, and I got caught. And when I got caught, they brought me in front of this juvenile judge. The juvenile judge, now this is 1990, so we're at the peak of prosecution, right? We're talking about the federal crime bill in a few years. We're ramping up policing, we're ramping up sanctions, et cetera. Well, they adjudicate me delinquent. They put me on probation. They made me do theft deterrent programs. I had to do community service hours. I had to check in with court. I'm 11 years old.
I'm about to say, good
right?
Lord.
And, when you're that age, being called a defendant, a juvenile, a probationer, that will mold you.
And that's scary terminology, especially if you don't know what that means. You're already in front of a judge.
And, they don't treat you very kindly. It's not like they're saying, hey, kid, look, you shouldn't steal. This is what you should do.
Like an adult.
Yeah.
Literally.
Wow. They treated me very poorly. And there's this thing within the Hispanic culture, and even I would say in minorities, that when you're dealing with authority, you're a little timid because you don't know, and you don't want to create more tension or friction or issues. And so my parents didn't ask a lot of questions. They tried to do the best they can. They were great supporting me, but that completely changed my life. I mean, I became what they told me I was. And so that opened the door to the darkest years of my journey. Now, in the same community, at the age of 13, I witnessed a murder about 10 feet away from me. It's not like in the movies where people get up, they banish. You know, you see this man moaning and groaning, and his soul is leaving his body, and I have to hop over him to get through the get out of the venue that we were in, and so that's a little traumatizing. Then at the same time, I'm walking home every single Friday. They had this thing called Cracker Day, right? And Cracker Day is when people beat up people who look very white, right?
That's a thing.
So you couldn't tell me you were Latino. You couldn't tell me you were Latino. You couldn't just speak enough Spanish.
I mean, well, that's the thing. Though we talked about this before the show. Like David kind of goes all over the place. Like he doesn't really look white. He doesn't really look. It's like sits
right. And so, but you know, no one's going to guess, right? When I'm there, and so they're like, "Get him." There's one of them, right? And so I would get jumped every Friday, and it was tough. I mean, I got to the point where my mom was concerned about the way I come home looking, and so I made a friend, and that friend, I knew he was affiliated, and I can tell simply because of the interactions he was having, things of that sort, and they were Hispanic, so he knew I was Hispanic. And the story goes like this. I'm in the lunch line with him, and if you remember back in those days, you have your tray, and then at the end,
right beside each other.
Yeah, and you can pick the juice and the cookie at the end if you want to buy it, right? So he picks up his cookie, he puts his cookie on his tray, and he's looking for his money, but he doesn't have it. So I reach in my book bag, I put 4 quarters in his tray, and I didn't say anything. He looks at me, and he's like, "Who is you, dog?" And I said, "My name is David." And he said, "Nah, homie, you can't be walking around the hood that white talking about your name is David. You're going to get your ass kicked every day." I was like, it's already happening, And he's like, "From now on, you go by Red." Well, after one of the really bad jumpings that I got, because I fought back one of the times, I fought back, and then the next week they really bludgeoned me. I went back to this dude, and I'm like, "Listen, man, I need to get down. I need to get down." And he's like, "All right, well, whatever you want to do, you can get jumped in." And for those that don't know what getting jumped in means, is you're initiated into a gang. And I told him, I said, "Can we put this on for about 3 o'clock on Friday? Because I've got muscle memory to get my ass kicked."
Right.
And so we did it after school one day, and I got jumped in, and my whole life changed because well, people will say, well, is gang affiliation bad? Yes and no. I learned a lot. We had a common goal together as a group, right? We're all struggling in the lower socioeconomic environment. We're in poverty. We're all trying to help each other out. And one of the things that I learned about from the older G's is that these are good people. They will give their shirt off their back to you. They do stuff in the community that people don't even, when you talk about gangs, you think shootings and violence. But the reality is there's book bag drives and shoe drives and all this stuff to help the younger kids. And I saw all of this with my own eyes. Well, I'm in school still. I'm in middle school, and then I'm transitioning to high school. But I'm over school because it wasn't that I didn't care about education. It's just that in Argentina, in 5th grade, they already taught me some of the math that I'm doing in America in 9th grade. So I wasn't being stimulated. They tried to tell me I was a student at risk, and so I'm like, but your curriculum is so outdated. Like I'm not being stimulated. So I dropped out, and I started selling drugs heavily. And I got to the point where I realized that selling drugs can make you some good money. And we created like a corporation-style process. We had a drive-through marijuana dope hole where people would come in through the front. They would make an order. They would pay. They would get their product, and they would drive off.
So McDonald's.
Right.
Well, like Krispy Kreme. 24/7, though. Krispy Kreme, Yeah, and so we were doing this, and
wow,
you would be surprised how quickly you start generating income, right? So now I'm helping my family. I'm, know where the next meal's coming from, so I'm not struggling anymore. And then all of a sudden, things change because when you start making money in this environment, you're going to have some haters, right? And I didn't have any financial literacy. I didn't open up a bank account. I didn't do any of that. So it's cash, and I'm buying stuff. Well, it's 1996, and I'm driving a 1994 Lincoln Town Car. And I'm 16 years old. I pull up to the gas station because I need to get gas and blasting some JT Money. I leave it on.
Did you really say JT Money?
JT Money. Something about pimping, right? Isn't that the album? So I'm blasting JT Money. I think that album came out after.
How about you probably was blasting Who Dat?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, Who Dat. That's right. That's right. And so then all of a sudden the music cuts off, and I'm like, wait a second. That's odd. That song's like 5 minutes long. So I look over, and as I'm looking out of the door of the gas station, I see some dude's butt sticking out of my driver's side of the car. And so I get out of the gas station and I hear like the hood alert whistles, "Skew," you know, and I look over to where that whistle's coming from, and I see an '84 Cutlass Oldsmobile that belongs to a rival gang member. So I'm like, oh no, I'm not going to that car because that's how you get clipped. That's how you get shot. And so I walk back towards my car as this dude's running, and all of a sudden I get to my car and I noticed that my Motorola StarTAC phone had been taken, and there was like several $100s in the sleeve. My detachable Alpine face for the radio was taken, so rendering my music system.
I was about to say, good grief. You just take me back. Like,
it's an Eazy-E song, right? Alpine detachable face. But, and so I called my right-hand man, and I'm like, look, this just happened. And, you know, in these environments, we have this culture where if you don't administer some level of retribution, you consider soft, right? And it'll happen on loop. So call my homies up, and I'm like, yo, listen, we got to make this dude pay. So it's 8 in the morning, 9 in the morning when this happened. We're driving around trying to find this guy. We can't find him. Eventually, we find out exactly where he lives. And we keep driving by his house, but he's never home throughout the day. And we spent the day letting the time pass, drinking and smoking. So by about 9 o'clock at night, by the time we get there, I'm gone. Like, I'm completely inebriated. And he comes out, he's wielding a firearm, and he's like, yo, you crazy coming out here to my mama's house? And I'm like, yo, you need to give me my back. And he's like, I ain't got it. And his sister is pleading with him to put the gun down. He obliges what the sister's asking him to do, puts the gun down. As soon as he puts the gun down, I rush him and I start stomping this dude. And as I'm beating him up, all of a sudden I hear freeze, which is code word for run as fast as you can, right?
It's not what I was thinking, but okay. That's not what I was thinking, but okay.
I mean, you don't want to get caught, right? So I run as fast as I can, and I get away. I think I got away. And I climbed this big, tall tree in a park, and I'm sitting there in this tree, and I'm sweating profusely, and all of a sudden I hear, "Arf!" And I was wishing that it was somebody's dog accidentally left in the park, but the barking gets louder and closer, and now I hear footsteps, and I'm like, oh, my God, they got the hounds coming after me, right?
Good grief.
Yeah, it's a pretty scary moment when you're a 16-year-old kid, right?
It's scary, period.
It's dark, and you're freaking out. So I know I need to scale the tree down. As soon as my feet hit the ground, I hear this loud sound over me, and it was like a washing machine just overloaded. And a big gust of wind, a huge light about 10 feet away from me, and I look up, and the ghetto bird is there. The chopper is what we used to call the ghetto bird.
You and these the ghetto bird?
I gotta remind you.
I feel like you're explaining an episode of The Wire. Like, just,
wow.
Oh my God, just carry on.
So the police chopper's up there looking for me, and I'm like, oh my God, they're looking for me with a chopper. So I try to hurry up and go as fast as I can to the outside of the park and hide in the shadows of my neighborhood. Well, all of a sudden, I thought I got away once I get into the neighborhood, and what I forgot was that I'm easily identifiable. Back then, I had, I'm identifiable now, but back then I had red dreads and gold teeth.
Are you serious? Yeah. I have got to see a picture of this.
There are some
all
pictures.
Said and done.
If you Google enough and with the right keywords, you might find something.
So you say Tanashi, 6'9"? That's you were the first. Okay, that's okay.
So and I'm talking about like grilled up dreads, So like I'm like a shimmering ghost. It's easy to
Oh my God!
It's easy to see me, and so I had to turn myself in. We go in front of the juvenile judge, and the prosecution wants to keep me in custody until the case is resolved. They're talking about how this was gang affiliated, how the victim is in critical condition. Apparently he was in the hospital for 6 months after that. And so they wanted me to stay. Well, the public defender says, hey, colorable argument for self-defense. This guy was robbed, and he was just trying to get his stuff back, and it just turned into a fight. And so the prosecution says, we've had it with Windecher. He's got 11 open cases right now.
Jesus.
Yeah, I was bad.
You a gangster.
11 open cases.
Real gangster.
Yeah, and so it was rough. Like that's the neighborhoods. I averaged 2 arrests a year at that point in my life.
And you did flee, so they said that you were a flight risk.
Oh, yeah, I was totally a flight risk. They didn't know if it was going to be a homicide case because the guy was in the hospital. Well, they bound the case over to adult court. So they sent me over, and they charged me for aggravated battery. That was the start of it. And they denied bond, and I was held in the Miami-Dade County Pretrial Detention Center as a 16-year-old kid. Wow. So I witnessed some ungodly things. You don't put a 16-year-old in with grown
Okay,
men.
like grown men.
Oh, and you know, I mean, I've seen men get raped. I've seen people get shanked in the throat. I've seen the officers, the correction officers, just pound people because they didn't respond to their demands quickly enough. And this is the environment that I was growing up in. You know, you take the totality of the things that I experienced up to that point, and then that happens, and I'm in custody. I'm locked up waiting for trial. And it was difficult. You know, I learned a lot about the criminal justice system from an internal standpoint. Anyways,
so let's get on the other side of your redemption story. What happens after all of that puts you on the path that you're on now?
So by 19, I had been arrested 13 times, spent 8 months incarcerated. I've been shot, I've been stabbed. And I knew that my life was going to end up in prison or I was going to end up dead. And so a love interest came into my life. She told me I was being an idiot, and I asked me what I wanted to do when I was older, and I told her with my experiences, what I've seen, what happened to my dad because of poverty, and then what I've seen with the criminal justice system. And I've seen the racial thrust to it, right? I go on into jail. My friends go to prison. I go to probation. They go to jail. And I just saw like heavier sanctions for black and brown folks. So I told her, I said I wanted to become a defense attorney. I wanted to become an attorney to try to help. And then she asked me, I asked her what she wanted to be. She said she wanted to be a police officer. And I thought, how is this going to work? You know? So it's never going to work. But then she said, I'll make you a deal. If you teach me all the things about criminality I cannot learn in college, I will tutor you to get your GED. And I will help you get into college. Well, she did. She tutored me. I got 155 out of 160 questions right on my GED. And that kind of gave me hope. It's going to sound sappy when I say it, but it made me feel like I could be a part of the world without being broken by my circumstances. So I started focusing. I worked really hard. I got into AIU, and I graduated top of my class with a 3.97 GPA. Then after that, I started to apply to a bunch of law schools. I had a fee waiver because I had an impoverished status. So I applied to 50 law schools. 48 of them turned me down immediately. They were like, no thanks, kid. You know, we're not interested in your money with that record. And 2 schools, Georgia State University and Atlanta's John Marshall, said, we're interested. Didn't work out with Georgia State, but John Marshall gave me a chance, and that's how Atlanta became my home. I started living here. I started going to school here, and the school kind of caught my back. They realized that my criminal record, there's a chance that I might not get certified fit to practice law.
Right.
So I may never sit for the bar exam, or even if I sat for the bar exam, I may never be able to swear into the practice. So they helped me a ton. They refer me to a guy named Manny Aurora. He's a local attorney here and well-renowned guy. He represents a lot of people. And he started mentoring me and tutoring me, and he spent a year like instructing me how to practice law. And one day I came to work, and he's like, you got to go to the DA's office. If the government vouches for you, you have a better shot at getting into the bar. So he gets me an interview with the DeKalb County District Attorney's Office. I met with this woman, and we're going back and forth. We had a great interview. And she's like, I'm going to hire you because you look like Chuck Norris, so you're going to kick ass in court.
Oh, my God, you do look like Chuck Norris. She's right.
Yeah, you know, it's so funny.
Does.
She was a trip, man. She was great. And so they hired me, and later, you know, they asked me about my criminal record, and I said, you know, I got a very serious record. I've been, you know, in a lot of trouble. And she's like, it can't be that bad. You got into law school. And I was like, well, yeah. And so, you know, the questioning stopped. And so I was like, okay, cool. And then they hired me. So about a week or so later, I'm in court working to help an ADA in a motion to suppress, and the chief investigator walks in. They're like, hey, Windecher, we need to talk to you. So they pull me out, and the woman is back in that same interview room, and she's like, listen, you can't work for the government. You can't be a government agent ever. With your criminal, your criminal record is worse than some of the people we prosecute. You've been incarcerated longer than some of the people we lock up.
I mean,
yeah, you know, and so I was stunned because, Ricardo, I didn't know what to say. I was just kind of like,
told you.
You know,
exactly.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so then I followed up with her, and I said, look, if the system purports to be a rehabilitative tool for people like me, then give me a chance to talk to the district attorney and share my story, because maybe he can make an informed decision, and that would help the process. So they brought me in, and then Robert James was the sitting district attorney there, and I have so much appreciation and admiration for this man. He stands up out of his desk, he sticks his hands out, and he says, Mr. Windecher, we've been monitoring your situation the entire time. We wanted to see how you respond to getting terminated given your criminal history. He said, you exceeded our expectations. He said, you are the American dream. That's how the title of my book came about. And he says, you know, you have immigrant parents. You grew up in poverty. You've gone through the criminal justice system 13 times. Now you got into law school, and now you're here to help with prosecution to create a better community. And he says it would be a travesty if you wouldn't take your job back. Would you take your job back? And I'm getting chills while he's talking to me, you know?
You
I'm like,
sound
yeah,
like a
I
Hispanic
definitely would be
kid
too,
combined
yeah.
with a black kid living life. That's really what your story's not. But let's pause there.
Yeah.
'Cause that's a good place. All right. So the thing I find interesting about you is that you acknowledge that your layout, in essence, is one that if you were a minority, it would not have played out that way. The fact that you acknowledge that. So let's segue to what is recidivism? Like let's go ahead and go there. What is recidivism?
Yeah, so recidivism is one's propensity to relapse into bad behavior, specifically criminal activity, right? So basically, a recidivist would be someone that has committed a crime and then recommitted, and that's a recidivist. So recidivism is defined as relapsing into criminal behavior.
Okay, so your organization does what exactly?
We do whatever we can to prevent recidivism from happening. So we try to intervene at the onset of criminality to provide resources, educational resources, community components to individuals that don't have access to these things. Otherwise, unless they would have been part of the system. So what we did is we created a curriculum, social, civic, financial literacy modules. We created a 12-month program that creates the opportunity to train on hard and soft skills that reintegrates people into the community. We provide mentoring. We allow them to have the opportunity to go into higher education or into the workforce. We basically rehabilitate people, back to your question, right? We rehabilitate people from having to commit crimes. We focus on people who are struggling through poverty, mental health issues, circumstances that they didn't choose. They were born into becoming a status offender, right, because they're poor or whatever the case may be. So we focus on providing educational resources and community resources to help people self-actualize.
And do an incredible job at it, by the way, because when I learned this about you, it is not an easy thing. There are over 1 million registered nonprofits, and a lot of them that are in sort of a community help or resource space. But the strides that you've been able to make in like county judicial circuits, which are not easy to operate in, can you talk more about that, like how you got plugged in and just how impactful RED has been?
Sure. So thanks for that question, because I'm so proud of our results. And one of the reasons why we can produce the results that we're producing is we always joke around amongst our group that we would love to advertise that amongst us there's like 100 years of incarceration together, right? Because
Well, hey.
here's the truth, right? Professional sports organizations, they hire retired players to fill certain roles, right? Why? They know the lay of the land. They know how the procedures can be improved. They understand the folks in the systems, and they know what to do to be successful. Well, the criminal justice system has never regarded the input of those of us who have been on the inside.
That is true.
And now we're finally starting to do that. And that's why folks like myself, Zeus, who's the director of operations for RED, he's got a similar history. A lot of our mentors do. We get it. We understand what people are suffering through, so we don't go in there judgy. We don't go in there trying to be punitive. We go in there trying to be understanding and trying to be supportive and provide a platform. So we've matriculated 125. We've graduated 118, and 7 people have reoffended, which is less than 8% recidivism rate.
Yeah.
And we're in DeKalb County. The way we ended up getting into DeKalb County was because of my situation with DeKalb County. Long story short, after my tenure in DeKalb as an extern, I went and got barred in Florida and Georgia, and I told the board of bar examiners that if they gave me an oath of attorney, I would publish a book. I would use every cent that I made to create a nonprofit organization that would provide educational resources to individuals charged like I was.
Wow.
And that's exactly what I did. We started in 2015. We went immediately into DeKalb. DeKalb has wonderful prosecutors. When I say people like Sherry Boston, Lisa Moultrie, these are just highly educated, very resourceful, super focused individuals in preventing recidivism. And so, it was kind of like a perfect storm. My story, their kind of culture, we came together and we just started doing work.
Yeah.
And
it's super impressive, too, because for context, I don't know if people know, about when you say 8% or 7%, it's like the national recidivism rate period is like between 50, 60, 7%.
Yes.
Like it's high. It's like most people. So I want people to understand that that's huge.
So
8%.
that's a good statistic to bring up, because in Georgia specifically, and this is irrefutable data because it's provided through the Department of Corrections, you're talking 30% for adults, and you're talking about 65% for young folks.
Yeah, see.
That's incredible. And that's it. And who does, people think that, when someone is charged with a crime, we apply the right sanction, it'll be a good deterrent. Well, the reality is it doesn't just affect the person charged. The system has been wronging the person charged, the victim of a crime, and the taxpayer funding the process. We've been doing the same thing for 40, 50 years now. And so we had to figure out something that works better. How do we create a better experience for the defendant? And I even don't like using that word, right?
No, I hear you.
Because they call it second chances, and the reality is a lot of these folks never even had a first chance. And then the victims, right? How can we create better experiences for them? How do we educate and rehabilitate people charged with crimes to reintegrate them into society to become contributing members? How do we create better experiences for victims? And how do we maximize the use of our general tax funds, be more fiscally responsible with our taxpayer funds? And that's kind of what started happening here in Georgia in 2012 with Governor Deal setting up the Georgia Council on Criminal Justice Reform, and then researching what we've been doing wrong, what we can do better, and what the focus is. And RED used that roadmap. RED used the reports from the council as a roadmap to create the program that we have. They did all the research for us, and we put it all together.
So let me ask you this, because you've been in the system a long time.
Yes.
A pretty long time. So from then to now, are we still seeing the same issues, or have they morphed into something else?
That's a loaded question. Here's why.
I know.
Because it depends on where you are.
Well, that's about Georgia specifically.
So I like to say there's Georgia and then there's Atlanta.
Oh.
Because the metro Atlanta area is a bit more progressive. They understand that if we don't find a better way, look, if you're a prosecutor or a police officer or a judge and the same people keep coming in front of you, you ain't doing your job right, okay? But Atlanta, the metro area, has figured that out. We have individuals focused on finding ways to get creative with the way that criminal cases are handled so that people don't continue to reoffend. A large percentage of the crime committed is committed by a small percentage of the community. So we have to find a way to help that percentage of the community get the resources they need to not reoffend, to not become a recidivist. But when you go out to the rural areas, I mean, you'll be shocked at some of the racist things that I've seen.
Well, and just in the criminal system, right?
I couldn't say them because if I tell you some of the things that I've seen, I would get disbarred.
Jeez.
Putting it simply, because I've seen some things that I just seen the system get very crafty in doing things with people and treating them a certain kind of way, right?
Yeah.
And we have to keep this low profile to try to fix it from the metro area and grow it organically. I mean, look, I can tell you, I don't want to say names. I was in a county recently where, again, if you don't see these tattoos and I'm fully suited up, you're going to have a different opinion of me, I think, right? Well, I'm sitting in this courtroom, and this is way out there, and I'm watching cross-armed as the people in custody are being brought out. Everybody in the courtroom is white as it gets, okay? And everybody being brought out is black and brown as it gets, right? And I'm sitting there like this, and this prosecutor, trying to build some rapport with me, leans in. He's like, "They're not like us, are they?"
Oh.
And I'm like, what the fuck does...
Yeah, in a court of law.
What does that mean?
Yeah. Wow.
Sorry about the language.
No, that's okay.
It brings me back to that moment.
Yeah.
And I looked at him and I just thought, wow, this is a problem that we will continue to deal with until we get these people out.
For sure.
And that is happening in the rural counties. I've had probation issues, and I'm sure that you can appreciate this, Simone, where I'm in this little podunk place, okay? Again, everybody's white, okay? And everybody there on a case is black or brown. And all of a sudden, and now, there are some jurisdictions in the South that you don't have to necessarily have gone to law school to become a judge, right?
That is true.
That's a major problem, right? Because now when people know the law better than the judges, and the judges do whatever they want anyway, anyways, so the story goes like this. I'm with my client, and they had some issues with the case. So they had to dismiss the case, and we had to go through this process called conditional discharge, fill out the paperwork, get it off the record, etc. Well, I don't trust anything that's going on based on the interactions that I was having. And when it was time to go to probation to fill out the paperwork to get the conditional discharge done, immediate, right? We had to fill out the paperwork. The probation officer says, nope, can't do this. And I said, what can't you do, ma'am? And she says, he has to be on probation. And I said, why are you saying that? And she says, well, my boss will never agree to this. He's been charged with X. Mm-hmm. He has to be on probation for at least 6 months. And I said, no, because, see, the judge signed right there, the prosecutor signed right there, and I signed right there, so you have to do what we agreed. And she's like, well, I don't like it because I'm going to get in trouble. And I said, well, can you bring your supervisor over here? He's not here. And I said, okay, well, and then all of a sudden the prosecutor walks out of the courtroom, and I said, hey, Mr. Prosecutor, can you come over here and explain that this has to happen right now? Mm-hmm. And he's like, yeah, so-and-so. Go ahead and just knock that out real quick. And so at that point, I'm like, all right, she's starting to fill out the paperwork, and I go on my way. I thank my guy. And this is a doctor, so he's a little stressed out about this situation, right, and about his career. And I go on about my business, and all of a sudden, about 2 weeks go by, and I'm waiting for this disposition to come in, the null process, the dismissal order. Doesn't come in. I called the clerk, and I said, hey, can you guys mail me a copy of the order? Okay, yeah, no problem. And I said, what's the order say by chance? And she's like, so 6 months probation.
Wow.
Yeah, and she started reading the conditions, and I'm like, what the? And so I said, ma'am, what was the woman's name? Mm-hmm. Can you give me her full name? And she says, so-and-so. And I said, okay, no problem. So I started doing some research. Private probation. The person she said is my supervisor that will never agree to this was her husband.
Oh, good grief.
Who owned the company.
Wow.
Oh, my God.
And so this is the kind of stuff that happens with probation. And I'm like, how do we fix this? This is way out there where there's no TV cameras, you know, and the community doesn't know any better. And obviously, you know, I'm limited to what I can do because I have to protect my client.
Right.
And so if I go and make a big deal out of it, and he's exposed in a way that he shouldn't be exposed, that could cause him harm.
That's exactly right, yeah.
And so all it does is fire me up to keep doing this work because, and here's the key to what Red does. We do everything pre-adjudication, which means that they're not on probation. Our students, our program participants are not on probation. And I feel like we're sort of in a war here, right? Kind of we're losing certain things, right? Like the accountabilities for the homicides, it hasn't been happening. But we can stop the funneling of black and brown people to prison if we stop them from being on probation. And the reason why probation is a root cause of recidivism, high recidivism rates, is because there's not enough probation officers to handle the boatload of cases we have in Georgia. Georgia has the highest rate of correctional control in the entire state. It's by far worse than any other state. I mean, it's like 3 times higher. And so if you do pre-adjudication, where you find creative alternatives to resolving criminal cases rather than putting them on probation, you take people out of harm's way.
Right. It's like taking them out like at the entrance of the system before they're in this, because once they're in the system, there's statistics change a lot, right? So it's like right when they're at that entryway.
And the statistics change because probation has a punitive culture.
Yeah.
And, you know, in our program, when our students get towards like month 9 or 10, where they realize like, we're graduating in a couple months, they start asking, like, what happens next? Can we hang out with y'all? Can I hang out with my mentor? I never heard anybody say that about a probation officer. Like, can we get you?
No.
And then the other statistic with probation is that there's a 25% chance that it's a technical issue, like someone didn't report or someone didn't pay something. Well, like what was the guy that was murdered that we were just talking about? Derek, was it right?
Rashard Brooks was on probation.
No, not Rashard Brooks. The one in Minneapolis that was murdered during the Chauvin trial. I'm drawing a blank right now. I think it was Derek Wright, maybe.
Okay, I can't.
And so, well, anyways, the guy's on probation for a marijuana matter, and you know, he's got a warrant for failure to pay his dues. Well, we're all going through a pandemic.
Right.
Are we really taking out warrants because somebody didn't pay their $35 a month thing? Now the guy's dead.
Wow.
This is probation causing these issues. And you bring up Rashard Brooks. The video the video that came out, the Reform Alliance, it'll rip your heart out if you watch it. Because you see this man who's essentially begging for help,
Right.
mercy. You know, I can't get the job I want. I gotta be home at a certain time. I can't even open my mouth and be frank, be transparent, be honest.
But I have to have a job because that's a part of it. But yeah.
Yeah, I'm dealing with a case right now where supervised release is preventing someone to come work with us.
Wow.
Oh, good grief.
And I'm like, what are y'all gonna do? Violate him because he wants a job?
Wow.
And they're like, you can't have two jobs. You can't have two W-2 jobs is what they're telling this guy.
Oh my God.
Wow.
And that's why I wish I could always
insane. Yeah.
give names, because like I'm watching this happen and unfold, and I'm like, do y'all realize, because I don't have a better way of putting it, how incredibly stupid this is?
Yeah.
The guy is on supervised release. He has access to gainful employment. He wants to work with an organization that is working in anti-recidivism, and you guys are blocking him.
Right.
You should be like, please do this, help, and then teach the others. But instead, you have them responding with like very short, rude, condescending emails, and it's like, no response yet. We haven't found out. You can only have one job. No, just no.
Just no period.
So you're just
for no
punishing
reason
just to
sometimes.
punish at this point. You're
Right.
just punishing just to punish. There's no.
And those are the cultures, Ricardo. That's why we have to. When I say repurpose police, it's repurpose the entire system. Really, the criminal justice system needs
overhaul.
better adjudication
Different
processes.
incentives and-
Yes, I mean, and the taxpayer should be going, wait, what is that? The same people are reoffending? Well, why? Well, because they're on probation and they can't get a job, and they got to check in at 2:00 when they have to be at work at 2:00 on Monday. But
Yeah.
the probation officer won't budge. This person's going to jail now or prison because the probation officer can give him a 5:30 check-in time instead of a 2:00 time. You
Or we
know?
can
Right.
just show up to their house and search their
Yeah,
house on a
anytime.
whim. And things of that
FaceTime me.
nature.
Come on, use technology, right? Do we need to be? Do I need to be physically present there? Right? Can we just
Yeah.
be common sense oriented in these situations?
I think the conditions are a big part of it. I'm glad you brought that up. Like they can be as creative as they like to with conditions. And I know one of our partners, one of her probation conditions was not to withdraw, I think, more than $300 a day. So she has to like pay her rent over the course of like a week because she has to make individual withdrawals and she has to slip her money order, otherwise she could violate a probation. But two things that you mentioned that I think are important too about like who a defendant is or like who this population are, that the proverbial they that are always being referred to, in the system is like people who find themselves defendants. When you say that it's more people than them that just suffer, it is also their families that suffer. It is their children that suffer. I mean, a huge part of what you said was a seed with you was witnessing someone that you know to be not only a good person or a well-intentioned person in that instance, but somebody who you love and watch them get railroaded, which happens all the time. And so it affects that person's family. And then the second part of that is that most people who are committing crimes or being accused of committing crimes have also been victims of crimes first. So most people in that situation have been. I mean, you were robbed. So it's like those are the two things that I think are always forgotten when these pictures are painted about. There's the people who commit crimes and there's people who don't. It's like there's just people.
Yes.
And generally speaking, anyone who's been in that position has also been the victim of a crime, if not first, many times.
And I think that we've failed to realize how that affects the young folks. Because if a parent is incarcerated because the laws weren't common sense laws, and
Right.
you have a recidivist statute that after 4 misdemeanor marijuana convictions you're going to get maxed out. Well, it's interesting you bring that up because one of the things that drives me nuts is when they say a black fatherless home.
Yeah.
That is so incredibly misleading. Terms like when politicians would use super predator. These are kids
Yeah.
who don't have a parent in their home. They don't have a parent in their home because y'all made incredibly difficult laws. The cocaine versus crack cocaine sanctions and how
Right.
that affected certain communities, right? And we know that there was a racial thrust to that, right? Because it only
proof.
affected a
Yeah.
specific demographic, right? And so, yeah, I get that. And that's why when we talk about reparations, we got a long way to go. There is so much work to do. The fact that we're harming families is shocking to me. And that's why when we went into the work that we're doing now, we thought, how do we create a better experience for everybody?
Right.
Because there is a way. And it doesn't matter whether you're liberal or conservative. This helps everybody. This creates community experiences that people would appreciate, right? More safety in the communities, better in law enforcement, lower recidivism rates, lower crime rates, lower correctional control, better use of the tax fund, meaning that thereby there'll be more fund for infrastructure,
Right.
education and advancements. And so this stuff makes sense, but I think, to your point about how it affects families, this is why we try to create awareness, because we always say it's not just the person charged that is being punished. It's a group of people. And sometimes you put people in a position they don't come back from. They can't come back from.
Right.
All right, so we're in our last couple of minutes. So final thoughts. Like, where should people's attention be as it pertains to recidivism and things of that magnitude? And how did they get in touch with you?
Okay, great. So where people should be and their mindset is reducing the barriers to reentry for folks. And what I mean by that is, or reducing any barriers that cause, for example, in Georgia, we have 10.8 million Georgians, right? Per last census. We have 4.2 million people with a criminal record. So these are people that can't have gainful employment, or they can get employment, but they're just not going to get the employment that
They can live off.
Right. A livable wage, a realistic employment, right? And so what we need is people in the private sector, entrepreneurs, folks that own businesses, start considering hiring justice-involved people, okay? A criminal record should not be a death knell in someone's future, okay? Especially when the statistics show that if someone has been arrested and 5 years have gone by since the incident, they have the same chance of reoffending as someone who has never been arrested. And then you talk about programs like RED, and you talk about the resources that we invest in the people. When you get somebody off the market, you get a resume, and that's it. But when you get someone that comes from our program, you get resumes, certifications, proper training, mentors that you have access to. You get a wide array of understanding of how this person is a great fit for our culture. So we need the private sector considering these things. And then there's also the protections and the incentives that we have in Georgia. In Georgia, we have a negligent hiring statute so that you're protected if you're a private employer. We have the work opportunity tax credit, which is a federal thing. We have the federal bonding program. So I want people to understand that if someone has a record, please just consider them. Just maybe remove the question off your application that says, have you been arrested or convicted? Get to know the person. Let them answer that question because, look, I can go apply right now to Chick-fil-A and I'll get denied. Employment because of my record. But I've been named in appellate cases. I've run a law firm. I mentor law students. I've created a restorative justice program that's maximizing the use of general tax funds, creating economic benefits, saving money. But I can't get a job at Chick-fil-A.
Wow.
Literally.
Right. And so that's what I want people to focus on. Focus on that. Give others a chance to show that they're worthy of a second chance. And just like we were saying, usually it's a first chance. It's not a second chance. And the way that people can find me is they can go to the website, stoprecidivism.org. That's .org. Stop Recidivism is a funky spelling, so it's RECIDIVISM. And, you know, if you Google my name, which is a funky spelling, Windecher, tons of stuff will pop up, and you can find me on different social platforms.
Yeah, your Google's pretty good. Most of the time when I Google folks, as I do, I don't find a whole lot. With you, it was enough. I still didn't find that red picture with the gold teeth because I'm going to look for it afterwards.
Oh, I know you're gonna.
I'm going to text it to you when I find it.
I
so.
can already see it coming out with the release for this.
I'm like, you know, he was
here
on the
is
show,
with his
but
dreads.
this is really him. This is really him.
Before and after.
Simone, final thoughts?
No, thank you for coming and sharing so much. I mean, you work inside the system. You're not just a person with lived experience, but you're an attorney and you're also an advocate, and those are very important roles. But I always love for people to hear who's doing the work and how much. I want them to understand how much work it is, because I think people can become so disillusioned so quickly, and you know, all they hear about is how hard everything is. There are people working all the time to change that and to make it better. So I just appreciate you sharing your perspective, and I hope people keep following you and seeing what Red's doing.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and you know how much I appreciate you with all the work and the advocacy that you do. And Ricardo, thank you for getting me on the show, because I always say awareness is the biggest challenge. People don't know what recidivism is and how it affects our communities, and so I'm grateful for you guys. I'm looking forward to building this relationship with y'all and hopefully continuing to create impact in our communities.
Yeah, you already made a mistake because I have your number. So, yeah, you already made a mistake. So.
Well, hit me up anytime. You know that I love connecting with folks, real folks, like real talk.
And, him and Griggs on the same show.
That'd be awesome.
I think I should get you two on the same show. I'm going to have to put out a call so we can really have a conversation between you two, because I think between you two we can really get some solutions, because that's the climate that we're in on the show. We want solutions. We want to point out what's going on, really talk about it, and then come up with solutions so that when people walk away from the broadcast, just like, okay, good, I'm about to go do that, because I'm about to go do that. So that's kind of the ideology.
I might have to have a longer show because, you know, we get paid to talk. So
yeah, I know. That's that 2 hours. We were talking about cousin. We have to put that 2 hours on that one with them too. But all right, with special thanks to our guest today. Thank you for being with us, and we will see you next Friday when we have Marcus Flowers, who is running against the terrible Marjorie. What is her full name? Yeah, I can say that's my show. I can say it. Marjorie Taylor Greene. He's running against her. So we're going to find out what his platform is, what his thoughts are, and after that, the week after that, we have Senator Kim Jackson, who's going to be, which is actually my senator. I didn't know that, so this is going to be real interesting when she gets here. So, and for all other information, go to the website ricecommunity.com. That's right with a W. We have officially finished our Black Man series, but you can watch all the episodes on the website and on Image of a Man Network on your Roku, Apple TV.